I'm very passionate about rock climbing, as you can see here in the Alps, because it allows me to explore beautiful spots in nature, to do extreme exercise, and also meet people from different walks of life. The other day, I met a friend of mine. He's a real estate developer and also a strong climber, and he has a little daughter. And as the conversation moved along, we were talking about agriculture. And he was saying, you know, Tom, my grandparents were farmers, and my parents also did some farming, and I helped them quite often. And actually, agriculture really is a thing of the past. And it's quite simple. You put a seed in the soil, we add some fertilizers and some pesticides to add nutrients and some, defend it from the pests. And then this plant will grow, and by the end of the year, you harvest your tomatoes and you're done with it. So in fact, I would prefer that my little daughter does something useful, like study AI, because that's what really advances our society. Or become a medical doctor, because we face obvious global challenges these days. And that's actually something that I've heard many times since I came to China since 2019. That agriculture is this thing of the past, and it's fairly simple. And I'm a professor for sustainable agricultural systems and engineering. So basically, I do agriculture every day. So it comes as a surprise for me. I want to tell you that I'm extremely passionate about agriculture because it touches everybody's life on a daily basis in very expected and very unexpected ways. So now we are 7.5 billion people on planet Earth, and every single person needs food. So let's take rice, for example. It's a staple food for half of the human population, and it's grown in paddy fields, so it's related to agriculture, that's quite obvious. But also, currently there's 1 billion cars driving around on the surface of the Earth, and if we want to keep these cars running, we need natural rubber to put 4 billion tires on these cars. And this rubber comes from tree crops, and we need to plant trees through agriculture to produce this natural rubber. And lastly, we're all wearing clothes. In the United States, the last year, 2 billion t-shirts were produced, and all of those are made from cotton. Cotton is produced on shrubs that comes from agricultural production areas. So basically, we use agriculture like rice, rubber, but also cotton pretty much every day for things like food, our transportation systems, and our clothing. So now there is some obvious decisions to take if we want to be sustainable on the long term. I want to talk a little bit about some decisions that we have to take when we produce agriculture. So let's think of this little square as the area where we can produce our crops, where we can produce rice, where we can produce rubber and cotton. And we can now put this either all at the same time on this square, or we can put it one after another. And that's a very important consideration, because by 2050, there will be 10 billion people on planet Earth. 10 billion people that all want to eat, and 2.5 billion more than we currently have. So if we want to be sustainable, we have to carefully think how we do that. Coming back to our little square, the second important decision that we have to take is, do we want to put that square on agricultural production areas where currently production is already happening? Or do we want to take it somewhere else, blow it up, and put it somewhere where currently natural ecosystems persist, such as forest? It's also a very important decision because agriculture currently covers 1/3 of the terrestrial surface of the Earth, and 1/4 of greenhouse gas emissions comes from agriculture. So we really don't want to expand our area more to the expense of natural ecosystems. And then the last decision we have to take about our little square is, how many fertilizers and pesticides do we want to put in? Yes, in the past, it really has produced more crop yields, but it has also polluted waterways, and it has pushed 1.5 million species very close to the brink of extinction. So these decisions are very critical when we want to think about the future of agriculture. I'm interested in solutions based on agricultural diversification. I want to take systems from the past, these diverse agricultural systems. You have many plant species, you have fertile soils, and you have biodiversity in these systems. Take them to the present, combine them with artificial intelligence, what we currently need to advance our societies, to create these sustainable agricultural systems of the future. Now, let me explain more about diversification. But actually, before I do, I want to talk about something that you guys consume every day, but you might not know what this is. I want to talk about cocoa. So cocoa grows on trees. This is a cocoa pod, right? So what happens is the farmers, they cut the pod from the tree, they peel out the seeds, they ferment the seeds, and then it ends up in a box like this. I know we are supposed to talk outside of the box, but now we put chocolate inside the box. So I eat chocolate every day. I don't know if you do, so cocoa is a very important crop. So coming back to what diversification is. Cocoa grows on trees. In fact, on many trees, and there's nothing else in parts of the tropics, in Latin America, in Africa, but also in Asia. And we call this monocultures because it's just a cocoa tree. And these plantations, currently they give quite high crop yields, but they're also very susceptible to climate change, and they require a lot of chemical inputs. Now we can move to a diversified cocoa system. We call them agroforestry systems. And this is when cocoa trees are shaded by other trees. And the benefit of these plantations is that they can take carbon out of the atmosphere, store them in the trees and in the soil, and they provide new habitats for biodiversity, for birds, for bats, for insects. And now you might think, so insects, what's the deal with insects? Actually, insects are very important because there's one bit of information I haven't told you about cocoa. Cocoa has little flowers, they're about the size of my 2 fingers squeezed together. And insects fly to these flowers. They take the pollen from this one flower, and then they keep flying to the next tree, and they put these pollen on the flower there. And that's when we have our pod, right? And this pollination process is ultimately responsible that we have the pods and the chocolate. So if there's no pollination, there's no pods. And if there's no pods, very likely we cannot enjoy our chocolate in the near future. So these ecosystem services such as pollination but also pest control, they're extremely critical for agricultural production, for sustainable agricultural production. And we can achieve this through these diversified systems. Of course, we're only talking about cocoa. So the question then naturally is, does it also work for other crops? And luckily I can answer you the question based on our research that we've done before. Yes, diversification works to have positive effects on soil fertility, on biodiversity, on pollination and on pest control, and it doesn't necessarily compromise crop yields. So that's pretty good news. We talked about the role of biodiversity for sustainable crop production. But really we cannot have our eyes and ears everywhere. And this is why in my group we developed these little cameras. And based on machine learning, they can see animals and plants, and they can distinguish what our eyes can also distinguish, but it takes a lot of time. So basically, we can train these guys with machine learning models, and then they can distinguish whether this is a cocoa pollinator or it's no cocoa pollinator. And then we can stream that up to the cloud, and do further analysis to see what are pollinators doing where and when. Currently, we test these devices in China and in Brazil because we want to understand how to manage diversified cocoa systems across the globe, because there is, of course, differences between Latin America and Asia. And we do this through the Global Agroforestry Network, an initiative that I founded in 2020, where we try to understand diversification effects in cocoa, coffee, and rubber. So these devices ultimately are quite vital to understand how we have to manage sustainable cropping systems in the future. I also want to highlight another part that is quite useful and that we can do with these devices for society. So you probably remember my friend from the beginning of the story with his little daughter that said, agriculture is a thing of the past and not very important. So imagine that his daughter could take our devices in the schoolyard to understand how plants are growing. Imagine that his little daughter could look at any animal she's interested in and see what these animals are doing during day and night. I think these devices have great potential to actually foster an understanding of nature, the connections in nature, and environmental awareness overall. It's this environmental awareness that we need to plant early in the future leaders and also in society overall to address some of these very pressing planetary challenges that go way beyond agriculture. And we need to start with this right now. Thank you.